Welcome to the latest edition of the CommonSpace Show. I'm David Jamieson.
And I'm Rhiannon Davies, and we're joined today for this edition by Michael Gray, who's a law student and a former CommonSpace journalist. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks.
Today we're going to be talking about the ongoing trials on the high streets. We're going to be talking about the struggling sterling currency and about Boris Johnson's reception in Scotland.
It may come as no surprise that he was literally booed when he was visiting the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Later on, he really actually had to leave via the back door of that building.
In the second half of the show, we're going to be talking about Scottish independence. First, we'll be showing a short film of interviews that we made in East Renfrewshire, asking people their views about a second independence referendum. And then we'll be talking about independence strategy, how no voters are won round to yes, and all that sort of thing.
A lot of stuff to be talking about.
Indeed. First of all, the high street. We were alerted to this particular, this unravelling story by actually the success of Greggs.
Greggs, the British high street bakery chain, has seen sales pass the £1 billion mark for the first time, boosted by what the company says was an extraordinary level of social and general interest around its vegan sausage roll. This success for Greggs comes despite what is being a difficult year for the British high street.
So Greggs announced yesterday that, contrary to most high street chains, they are doing phenomenally well, partly due to the success of the vegan sausage roll and all that brings. But they have said that the pre-tax earnings for this first half of the year is 36.7 million, which is 50% higher than it was this time last year. And for the first half of the year, that's a total of 546 million they've earned. Mm-hmm. I'll check that.
But the upshot of this is they're opening 100 new shops.
Yeah, which is quite a bucking of the trend compared to most high streets.
So in the very near future, the high streets will be deserted, except for Greggs, with huge vegan sausage roll signs outside.
Or maybe in Edinburgh it will be Greggs Tart and Tack Shop, Greggs Tart and Tack Shop.
Yeah.
There was a report also this week put out through Edinburgh City Council criticising the Royal Mile and the high street in Edinburgh for looking at a similar trajectory. So they were worried about it becoming a tourist ghetto and only being populated by low price, low quality shops.
Isn't that a bit late in some reasons? Isn't it already a tourist ghetto?
That's what a lot of people said. A lot of people saying it's a bit late in the game to be worried about it.
Yeah.
But presumably what happens at the end of that is tourists stop going there. Because the big thing in tourism is now authenticity. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to go and find some little cafe tucked away that the locals go to or something like that. So if it is just Greggs and Tart and Tack, they'll just decline in its value to tourists.
Which raises a wider question about what are the high streets for, what's the future of the high street if it's only success stories or places that are budget stores of one sort or another, like either cheap food or cheap tourist goods. If more people are shopping online, should we be looking at other types of investment or other types of usage for city centres?
Yeah, it sort of thing gives me the fear because I can't imagine, I like to go into town centres because I like to just, walk around and there's a large number of people there and stuff. Particularly in cities, it's maybe a different trajectory, but in small towns, you can imagine that dying out.
We did a special week of coverage on towns and Scottish towns and kind of high streets of them, and we went to Dumfries and to Ayr and a couple of other places. But in Dumfries, one of the things that I heard from older people particularly was one of the reasons that they didn't come into the high street as opposed to going to the out-of-town shopping centres was because the parking was very limited and you could only have a maximum of 2 hours parking and it was paid for. And because of that wasn't enough time for them to come and do their messages, to come and take their time to enjoy the high street, to sit and have a coffee and a chat and do the shopping as well. And there was a story yesterday, I don't know if you saw, about Paisley. Paisley has introduced, or is going to introduce, free parking in its town centre in an effort, for 3 hours, in an effort to bring people back into the town centre and to rejuvenate it. Mm-hmm. Which I think, has a lot of positives in the way of actually bringing people in, but also there's been a bit of a backlash against it in terms of Green campaigners saying we should be getting cars out of the town centres, not bringing them in.
Yeah, when you're talking about issues like this in Scotland, you always return to major themes, and one is that transport is just broken. It's not really that surprising that people from suburbs aren't coming into town centres when transport system's so sparse and so inaccessible. And as you say, the only incentives that councils can think of is to improve access for cars, thus bringing in all these other issues as well.
Well, you can tell I've moved from Glasgow to Edinburgh because all my references are now Edinburgh-centric.
Never mind.
Lothian buses is often held up as a positive model, as a success story of like municipal ownership. Of course, there's like threat strike action there over allegations of worker mistreatment. But they have, on the other side of the coin, become the first to introduce contactless payments on the bus service. And that's just one small, simple but effective thing that all bus services in Scotland should be implementing. Like, everyone has their own story of having to fankle about in your pocket to find the right change.
Or having to pay £5 because you haven't got any change, but you need to get on that bus. And
Which does just put you off using the bus. So there's these small ways that we can make it more effective and more accessible.
I don't know if people have seen, but the BBC sent a couple of reporters to airports, Heathrow and a couple of others, and got them to exchange their pounds for euros. As I understand at Heathrow, they exchanged £100 for 88 euros, which isn't the market rate as I understand it, but it's a bit different. Is unbelievable if you remember when the euro was introduced. I remember when the euro was introduced very vividly, because they'd also just introduced the £2 coins, and I thought the £2 coins looked really cool. So I was annoyed. I didn't want the euro to come in because I thought we just got these, which is you were a
William Hague Save Our Pounds
Save Our
campaigner. Save Our £2.
I hope you're not.
2001 was that?
I hope you're not suggesting that Hague had the mentality of a 10-year-old who just likes a shiny coin.
Possibly.
But yeah, I mean, it's remarkable given that the story of the euro has not been one of success. It's been pretty calamitous, and yet
we're worse.
yeah.
1.09 pound to the euro at the moment, and it's getting ever closer, and probably will hit. Wouldn't be surprised if it hit parity in the next year. On that similar theme, there was some currency traders that were briefing parts of the press in the last week, and they were bemoaning the wider state of uncertainty in politics over the past 3 years. They can't tell which way the markets are going to go. But they said, one thing we can tell at the moment that we are confident of with Boris Johnson, he's running down the country with no deal stuff.
Boris Johnson says he will simply lead the United Kingdom out of the European Union without any exit deal at all, which would instantaneously bring a level of chaos to Britain not seen since World War II.
He's, speculating about the cabinet and taking a more hardline direction. And one thing we are confident of is that the pound is going to slump further, and that means we can make lots of money. So as ever, when there's a crisis, there's an opportunity for the rich.
There's always going to be winners, and it's not usually going to be us.
So Boris Johnson came up to Edinburgh the other day. I saw that you were there in your enacting your former life as a journalist.
front row seat. It's quite lucky when he was just round the corner. I felt I should go and boo in person rather than digitally, just to be polite.
That seems like, again, turning the tables on the social digital world. Right?
That was down at the Parliament though, so
Yes.
It was Butte House that the kind of viral image emerged from, where there were lots of people booing him and stuff. Now, I've had a lot of debates about this, because some people are saying, this is good, this is how politics works now. It works for Boris Johnson because the people who are booing him are hated by his core support. So it's kind of a Trumpisation of politics, polarisation, stuff like that.
Donald Trump likes Boris Johnson.
They're saying Britain Trump. They call him Britain Trump, and people are saying that's a good thing.
And I saw he was also booed in Cardiff Bay. I don't agree with that. I mean, I don't. First of all, I don't think that British politics can work like American politics. Polarisation didn't work for Trump. The way the British electoral system operates, it doesn't work in the same way. But also, he's in his first week, and he's now twice been very loudly, publicly booed or whatever. On a basic PR level, it's not, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, there's no honeymoon period that you expect from a new leading kind of politician.
Yeah, and new prime ministers typically expect a bounce early on, and almost all of them get it. May got it, even Gordon Brown got it, right? And he'd been in power for, God knows how many years by that point. Boris Johnson's bounce has been very shallow. So the idea that this is all some sort of ingenious strategy doesn't work for me. I think that in that round. You know, like Dominic Cummings is one of his guys now. And there's a bit of a mythology that builds up around these people, these puppet masters in the background, right? A lot of people say to me, Dominic Cummings is a genius. He arranged all this, he's in charge, he's behind all of this. But I think it's been a pretty rough week for Johnson.
I think they'll be quietly happy with the direction of travel at the moment, but that's because I think they're deluded and they're screwed. They have partly ebbed away at the Brexit party vote, and that's their number one challenge for the next year. They need to try and unite Leave voters around his project, and that's why he's been hardline for the past few months and will continue to be hardline. But where that leads is utter delusion, because when it comes to October 31st, I can't see them meeting that deadline. I think it's most likely going to be an extension. There's an outside chance there'll be an earlier general election. In either situation, he'll have failed to deliver Brexit at the date he has promised 100 times, and that's the exact same pit that Theresa May fell into.
Absolutely. So her polling, I mean, again, we're talking about polls here and who knows, but her polling remains really robust right up until the date when she didn't leave, and then it just collapsed overnight. I think politicians sometimes underestimate how symbolic dates like that are for the public, that a distinct promise was made, and Johnson's gone in so hard on this. He keeps saying, deal or no deal, we're out on the 31st of October.
Do or die. So the choice, therefore, is if he doesn't do it, he has to die. That's the choice that he's set up. And I think this political strategy is, if we don't deliver it, we'll blame Parliament and the EU for blocking it. But I think the response from the public is going to be, you're a liar. You're a con man, you promised this, just like your predecessor, and a large chunk of his base in England will then vote for the Brexit party, and who the hell knows what that means in terms of a general election, either forced by Parliament or called by Johnson, but it certainly doesn't mean a Conservative government.
Talking about what the public think, David and I were out today in East Renfrewshire to speak to people to find out what they thought about Boris, what they thought about Brexit, and what they thought about the chances were of a second Scottish independence referendum.
Thing is just crazy. They don't govern because they're just looking at independence no matter what. I can't see that ever happening.
Did you support leaving the EU, or are you happy with that decision? Or
well, that was what the Democratic vote wanted, so I would go along with it. But unfortunately, a lot of MPs have their own agenda.
What would you like to see the future of Scotland be? What would you like to see politics focus on in Scotland?
It's been a United Kingdom for 300 and so years, and I see no reason why we should change that in any way. The greeting and groaning that comes from some parts of the Scottish electorate is just a knee-jerk, call it prejudice if you like, towards the English.
I would vote for independence.
How did you vote last referendum?
I did vote for independence last time, but I feel that I would be more committed to it this time.
Do you think that politics in Britain is changing in a way that pushes you further in that direction?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. What in particular?
Brexit. Yeah, because I and many Scots people didn't want to leave Europe. And I just keep thinking this is just a disaster, and I can't believe it's actually happening.
How do you feel about Boris Johnson becoming PM?
Not happy at all. Not happy at all. I don't feel that he's a trustworthy person.
And Nicola Sturgeon's also called for a second referendum on EU membership. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes.
So
I think anything is a good idea at the moment, other than what's happening.
Why did you change your mind on independence? You said you were for it at one point, but not now.
Well, initially I thought yes, it would be good, but then when you read into it more, you realise that we actually need to stay in the Union for not only for political but economic reasons, and I don't think we'd ever make it on our own. Let's hope we do it. Let's be positive about it.
About Brexit?
Yeah, well, we're a good nation. We're inventors, and we've done so much. I know you can't look back in the past, but you can do it. I'm positive.
All right.
I'm happy with Boris.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
How would you feel about a second independence referendum in Scotland?
I would be feeling very positive about it.
Yeah.
I think it's something that's badly needed. We're in a mess. and Scotland's better off without it.
How do you feel about Boris Johnson and Brexit?
An absolute disgrace. He hasn't got the wherewithal, he hasn't got the intelligence, he's a blusterer, a chancellor of the highest order, and I have no time for him.
This area was one of the slightly more no-voting areas in the west coast of Scotland last time. What do you think would change people's minds round here?
I think the SNP have to look at the currency situation. You need to look at the Scottish pound if they're going to be one, and have to see how they're going to back it, how they're going to make it stronger, how they're going to use the assets that we have. We have undoubtedly got lots of assets, but we have to use them properly.
Yeah. So a firm policy on currency, one that people could believe in, would be important.
Because allied that to people's pensions, that's what people around here, that's why they voted no, because they're scared about their pensions. Well, the British government have guaranteed that, and if they read through it, you'll find that that is the case. But a lot of them don't know that.
I don't believe in having a second referendum.
Yeah. Why not?
Because we've already had one. So everybody voted. It's the same as Brexit, everybody voted.
So you would like to see the no vote honoured and the leave vote honoured?
I'm not saying I'd like to see, I wouldn't like to say that, but people were given an opinion and they voted, and I think we have to respect everybody's vote.
Do you think we should leave the EU on the end of October, as Boris Johnson says?
I think we should wait and see it's a total mess, an absolute mess. I don't trust any of them.
How would you feel about a Scottish independence referendum now?
I would feel very happy with that.
How did you vote in the first referendum?
I voted yes.
And you would do so again?
Yeah. Oh, Boris is a funny character. Sometimes you would like just to see how he got on with all this, plenty of bluff and bluster, and it would be quite good to see if anything does turn out good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And it would be also interesting to see if it was such a disaster, the no deal as well, even although the SNP are saying that it would be a disaster.
Yeah.
I'm a nationalist. So
you voted yes in 2014.
Yeah.
How do you feel about? How do you feel about Brexit? Has that changed your view on independence?
Brexit, to me, honestly, I just find the whole thing a mess.
How soon would you like another referendum?
As soon as possible, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're just getting deeper and deeper into a mire. It's not very nice at all.
What issues around kind of Barhead, this area, do you think an independent Scotland could tackle?
Well, there is a drug issue, but that's everywhere. That's everywhere. There's housing issues, although they're building houses all over the place out here just now. They're doing away with looks as if they're doing away with the green belt. But I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that could go on around here.
Did you vote yes in 2014?
Aye.
And do you feel more committed to that position now or less?
Just the same, because I was the same then. I voted yes then, and I'll still be voting yes again. I think I'll always vote yes.
So what's putting you in two minds about it then? What makes you think that maybe independence would be a good one?
Because I don't think they're doing well for the country, and they're not doing well running councils. So if they can't do that, how are they going to run a country?
How did you vote in 2014?
2014, I voted for independence.
Right, okay. But now you're a bit more unsure.
And I voted for Brexit.
Right.
I'm unsure because of what I see, the evidence in front of me.
Yeah.
I don't think the councils, I think Glasgow Council's SNP.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think they're doing well. And I don't think the government's doing well either.
So you voted for independence and Brexit.
Yes.
What did you like about Brexit?
I just felt it would be a good thing.
Did you see that as quite a similar idea to Scottish independence?
In some ways, aye. So it's quite ironic that they want independence for Europe, but they don't want Scotland to take independence for the UK.
Yeah. You see that as a big contradiction?
Well, it's an interesting thing to consider.
And Boris Johnson saying he wants to take us out at the end of October. How do you feel about that situation?
Well, the thing is this, they've had 3 years to do something about it, and now they're supposed to be he's going to do something before the 31st of October. The thing with they're duping the public. I think they should leave with a deal, because if they leave without a deal, there's going to be a lot of hardship. But they'll probably survive it.
Yeah.
And then when the Brexit's dealt with, we'll consider the Scottish independence.
Okay, so those were the opinions of a very scientific survey of the people we bumped into in East Renfrewshire.
That we bumped into and that would speak to us, because some wouldn't.
And some wouldn't speak to us, that's true. More kind of no voters, I think.
Angry no voters.
Angry no voters, and we can get onto that. Our idea was to go to Newton Mayens first, and then on to Barrhead, because of course East Ren was one of the kind of higher no voting areas in the West Coast. Newton Mayens in particular, as we saw, one guy there said that was partly explainable by how many pensions there are in Newton Mayens, but it's also a bit more affluent. Barrhead's got more working class. But to be honest, I mean, we found a real smattering across both constituencies, and found just about every single position
combination of Boris and Brexit
that you could come across. So I thought that was interesting, because I think we sometimes imagine that the population aligns with the official lines of the parties in the parliament, and actually people are scattered all over the place in terms of Brexit, independence, Boris Johnson, progressive, left wing, right wing, whatever. People often have a big mixture of ideas in their heads. Michael, just from looking at those responses, what do you think we have to bear in mind in terms of support for independence in the country and how to win round no votes and things like that?
There isn't a consensus on where to go next, and there isn't a majority for independence. Yeah. I think some people maybe find that hard to believe because of how absolutely chaotic the last 3 years has been. But all the polling evidence, all the public engagement exercises that have been carried out show support for independence is obviously way higher than it was in 2012, but is still short of a majority position. And while Brexit and the chaos of mismanagement at Westminster has maybe moved some people and opened up some people's minds to the possibility of independence, it isn't there yet.
I thought, I have a couple of favourites there. One was the guy who I thought was very pro-independence, but he said, we need a solid position on currency. I thought that was interesting. He said a Scottish pound, but he didn't indicate exactly what he meant by that. I thought he was very interesting because he was very pragmatically talking about the area in which he lived. I mean, is it not a problem that if there is going to be an independence referendum in the next couple of years, and we can talk about how likely we think that is, those fundamental questions still haven't been addressed, really.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be anytime soon. So I think it's also about information and how you get information down to people. And I was just thinking when you're talking there about the kind of the mismatch of different views that you have, you don't necessarily find the same things on Twitter, and people maybe take a harder line in one direction and they find their tribes and they stick to them. And I think, you have a tendency to think that everyone thinks like that because we're on Twitter and we speak to people online that seem like that. But actually when you get down onto the streets and you speak to people there, they've got a very different opinion of things because they're getting information in a different way. And I think it comes back to that, how do you get information to those people and how do you get the right messages or, those kind of practical ideas that make a difference? How do you translate those and get them to the people that you want to reach?
Personally, I've always found the currency debate a bit of a distraction. I understand why it is of huge fundamental importance in terms of macroeconomic policy, industrial economic policy, but I feel like uncertainty over the currency stems from a lack of confidence in the economy and a lack of confidence in self-government in general. The most effective slogan I've seen in this debate is the big enough, rich enough, smart enough slogan that some people within the independence movement have been using, a slightly more positive twist on the kind of old school, slightly cranky, too poor, too small, too wee, too stupid line. So big enough, rich enough, smart enough. If you believe those things about Scotland, then I think you have more confidence when you're asked, can Scotland have a successful currency? Well, if it's big enough, it's rich enough, and it's smart enough, then of course it can. If you get bogged down in the discussion about which currency direction, well, people don't even have confidence in their own surroundings, then I think you're always going to struggle to win that argument.
It's interesting how those messages filter down, though, because one guy who we found who had voted independence, but had subsequently become disinterested in it and now seem more interested in Brexit, he picked up that idea of, he actually said, one of the reasons he supported Brexit and that he kept saying sort of, we can do it, that kind of optimistic when he said, we're a very inventive country, which is something that people always said about Scotland during the independence referendum, Alexander Graham Bell, all that kind of stuff. it's interesting to me that he had sort of apportioned a pro-independence argument for a pro-Brexit argument.
And yet he used the same argument against independence.
Yeah. So, but it just makes you realise that all of that messaging, because we did also find a couple of people like who took the kind of classic Ruth Davidson line of they should get on with government. The independents, the SNP need to get on with government. We found that a couple of times. But the way that message discipline filters down is actually quite chaotic. You know, it doesn't just, as I was saying, doesn't sort of just carve people into given constituencies. They sometimes appropriate the enemy camp's argument and use it for their own ends.
Which also comes back to the fact that we were talking about on the car on the way back, was that actually, no matter what kind of practical solutions that you might be offering, it comes down to emotions. Brexit came down to emotions, independence came down to emotions and how you feel and how you identify yourself, more so than those kind of actual offers on the table, I think.
Yeah, and I think it does depend a huge amount on whether or not you think your own national imagined community has the wherewithal to go alone and so on, which is why that's become such a major preoccupation, both in the independence movement and the Brexit movement. But it interested me as well how many of them were quite fluid.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting, and it's such a polarising issue, independence, I was expecting just people to be absolute no's or absolute yeses, and there were those.
Yeah.
But we did speak to a few people who had either changed their mind or weren't sure anymore.
Yeah, and there were also other people that didn't want to speak to us because they didn't have an opinion. There was a few people that said, "Oh, I don't know about politics," or "I don't know about that," and I don't have an idea on this, which is interesting.
But to maybe balance off my cynicism or maybe scepticism at the start, I do expect Scotland will become an independent country in the next 10 years. There's plenty of evidence that supports that there's a lot of people who are still open-minded, that they're willing to change their minds, that younger people are more likely to support independence, and that the political flux in Westminster will send people in that direction. So I think that argument is there to be won. The difficult position we're all in now is, if it's only a matter of time, how much time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, how gradualist do you think the SNP is at this point? I mean, because I feel kind of like we keep having the carrot dangled.
Mm-hmm.
There have been various promises of an independence referendum since Brexit, since the Brexit vote, rather, of course. But I mean, what do you think the timescale looks like inside the leadership of the SNP's head?
Long.
Yeah.
And I've changed my mind, funnily enough. I think after the Brexit vote, I was one of the people sort of expectant, given the statement by the First Minister the morning after about the probability of another referendum. I was expecting the wheels on that to move quickly. I was expecting people in Civic Scotland and in wider society to seize the urgency of the moment. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen within the next year. The March 2017 statement pushing things forward pushed forward a timescale, but was slapped down, and Civic Scotland again stayed silent. I'm talking about the universities, the charities, the business lobby, all these domestic institutions of self-government in Scotland have largely sat on their hands waiting to see which way the wind is going to blow. And for that reason, I've moved from someone who was expectant that we could run a campaign and win to someone who now sees where the leadership of the movement, which is situated in the SNP, are directing their attention, and that is clearly towards a longer game. My frustration about all this is how it's impacted the independence movement, because that situation has created a massive failure of expectation management, where people like me and a lot of other people in the movement expected something to happen quicker. They didn't think they'd be sitting here 3 years later feeling frustrated. And I feel like the leadership in the SNP have played both sides. They've been happy to keep their membership in the movement excited and energised, expecting something's about to happen, but they've actually played a very cautious game. They've not put forward legislation for a referendum. They've put forward, and they could have done that, they've put forward legislation on referendums and the right to hold referendums, and they only have done that after a number of years. It's not been passed yet. They could have had that challenged in the courts. It's not clear who has the legal power to hold a referendum, despite what bullshit you might have heard elsewhere. It's not a reserved power. We simply don't know. They could have done that. They haven't. So they've been cautious. They've said we need to wait till Brexit is clear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a reason or an excuse, depending on which side of the fence you're on, for 3 years. And it might still be a reason or an excuse for 2 more years. So my frustration is that the SNP leadership seems to me to be clearly gradualist. I think they'd prefer a referendum to be in five years' time, 6 years' time, in a situation where they were confident of winning, rather than taking a risk within the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what you kind of alluded to some of the consequences of that carrot dangling thing. I also wonder if that's created problems on the other side, because when we were talking to people and they were saying, "Oh well, this is constant? Well, why don't they get back to the day job?" It does throw a little legitimacy in the direction of that particular argument. Although, as we were saying, Ruth Davidson's in crisis now as well. That whole kind of Tory paradigm in Scotland is.
Yeah, so that's something to cheer us all up. I think that has strengthened the position of the SNP. So while they were under threat from their base about maybe not going fast enough, the Tories are in an even bigger mess. But that's almost taken for granted now. The question is, what do we do about it? What does the country do about it? I think we're looking at a referendum within the next Parliament, which is 2021 to 26. And I wish people at the top of the SNP were more honest about that. Because I don't think they're genuine in talk about a referendum in 2020. I think they'll use that as a springboard in the 2021 Holyrood election to say, this is the opportunity, this is the moment. We've seen Brexit go one way or the other. It's been incompetent, it's been a mess. We need the power to become independent within the lifetime of this Parliament.
I wouldn't even be surprised if Nicola Sturgeon requests another independence referendum, is rebuffed again just shortly before the Scottish elections. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would be a perfect manoeuvre. The Tories would have to walk into that trap.
And I think the court case that I alluded to about the power to hold a referendum could be part of that circus, that sideshow. So they could move for the legislative process through Holyrood in 2020, as they promised to do, and see that rebuffed in the courts, or that would be a grand showdown in the UK Supreme Court. And that would be entertaining, but it wouldn't be a referendum. It wouldn't be a legally binding referendum, because it would be delayed until the future.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing your opinions with us on this complex topic, Michael. If you've got any thoughts on Scottish independence and what should happen next or what will happen next, please let us know in the comments below, or tell us what you think we should be talking about in the next issue of this show. And thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thanks.
Cheers.